So to share my story with you, we're going to go back a couple years to 2013. In 2013, I had a wonderful opportunity to overcome technical difficulties, to deploy to Afghanistan and serve as a Marine C-130 pilot. And during this period of time, what's interesting about a deployment is when you're removed from your normal day-to-day, when you're removed from the normal routine that you have, when you're removed from your friends and your family and everything that you're used to back home, it opens up a lot of time for you to reflect and to think about things. Now, granted, you do a lot of work when you're deployed. Sometimes you work around the clock. But when you're not working around the clock and you don't have your normal friends to hang out with, you don't have your normal family activities that you're familiar with, it gives you a lot of time when you're sitting in your room or when you are on watch to reflect about things in your life. And one of the things that I spent a lot of time reflecting on, of course, I spent a lot of time thinking about my friends and family back home, but one of the things I spent a lot of time reflecting on was, of all things, the enemy. Sun Tzu advised his warriors to really get to know the enemy, know and understand the enemy. And I wanted to understand his motives, understand what it was that had brought him to this time and this position in life. I didn't want to understand the enemy force as a whole. I want to understand the individual person, because I understand that a nation or an enemy force might go to war for a specific reason, but that might not be the same motives that an individual has. And as I investigated this and reflected on it and did some research into the different lives of some of those that we were fighting, I realized many of them weren't fighting just out of pure hatred for America. Many of them were fighting for much more basic things like fear of their own life, fear of protecting their family. Many of them were fighting because they had no other means to support themselves, and the only option they had was to take up arms and earn a paycheck from somebody that was going to help provide for their needs. Some were merchants that had businesses that were destroyed as collateral damage to some of the war fighting that was taking place. Some were farmers that lost their fields and lost their ability to support their family. And as I realized this, the motives of some of these individuals, they were more basic. They were protect themselves. They were how they responded to the fear that they had. It was the best solution that they could come up with at the time. They felt an obligation to serve a cause that was greater than themselves, whether it was just taking care of their family, whether it was supporting their community. But on an individual basis, on an individual level, these personal motives of many of these enemy soldiers that were on the ground were very similar to my own. I was confused about some things. I had some individual motives. I wanted to serve something that was greater than myself. I felt an obligation to serve and protect my community and support my family. And on an individual basis, I realized that we had some things in common. I went to Afghanistan. I went to a country far away thinking that we had nothing in common and there was nothing unique between us, and that's why we were at war, and that's why two people could take up arms against one another. But when I reflected on it and thought about it, I realized that we had possibly much more in common than we had that divided us. Well, one of the missions that we would do is flying Afghan National Army soldiers, so ANA soldiers, from one base to another to receive medical care. And the Afghan National Army soldier, it's an Afghan national that is fighting alongside coalition forces, trying to help us defeat the Taliban and being trained by us to hopefully one day either take over the fight or help stabilize, keep a peaceful nation stabilized once we've left. So because they're fighting alongside of us, they would also receive our medical care. They would receive the benefits of many of the tools and the resources that we had while we were warfighting. So on some occasions, we would fly these Afghan National Army soldiers from one base to another if they'd been wounded in battle and needed some kind of specialized treatment or specialized care. But this unique mission gave me an opportunity to see something that really changed my perspective. I was able to look in the eyes of these Afghan National Army soldiers, and by the looks of their faces, I would see that many of them were very young, they were frail, they were very scared, they were confused many times. But I also saw a face that looked very similar to, or almost exactly like, those enemy forces that were on the ground that we were fighting against. It was easier for me to comprehend how two enemy forces could go to battle or could be engaged in a war when they have very little that is similar between their background and their upbringing. When I compare myself to the enemy soldier on the ground, our life experience is completely different to that point. Our religious beliefs completely different to that point. Our community, our family, the experiences that we had growing up completely different. So it's a little bit easier to understand how people from two totally different backgrounds could be engaged in a conflict. But when I looked at these ANA soldiers on my plane, I realized that they had the same background. They came from the same communities. In some instances, they had the same blood in their veins. They were brothers or cousins of those that they were engaged in battle against. And I realized that they had much more in common than what I had with that enemy soldier on the ground. In many instances, it was just a single point of view or a single decision between option A or option B that put one of these men on the back of my plane receiving the best medical care of the Western world, and the other one on the ground suffering the brunt of our military might.